Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you, or evening, even wherever you are. Welcome to Cancer Book Club. This is May of 2021. And today we are interviewing Andrea Wilson Woods, whose book, Better Off Bald, A Life in 147 Days, documents her journey as a caregiver with her younger sister who ultimately died of liver cancer. So welcome Andrea to Cancer Book Club, and we're delighted that you shared your book with us and that you're open to a conversation about it. I guess part of it is a conversation about the book, but some of it's a conversation about your experience, because in all of the book clubs that we've done, we have yet to interview a caregiver.
Really?
So almost all our interviewees have been people who have been survivors or sufferers, or sometimes we've read the journals or whatever of folks who didn't make it. But caregivers, this is your book, is the first book that is entirely written from the caregiver perspective, and I like the way it was written in the first person present tense, because that's how I wrote to my book, The Cancer Living. That's what it's like. It's like, this is happening now.
Yep.
There is no ego going back and looking at it retrospectively, although it's a bit of a conceit, because of course you are looking at it back, write it. But to the reader, it's a much more urgent read to think, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. So I guess that is the caregiver perspective and the patient perspective differ. And I guess I wonder, if you could speak, Andrea, to as a just looking at what my husband's gone through, the caregivers have a tough road to hoe, even in some ways tougher than the cancer patient, in the sense that they have to be sort of relentlessly positive, and yet they are also incredibly drained.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you, Pat and Robin, for having me. And I just wanted to say, when we scheduled this book club, I didn't think very much about the specific date so much as, oh, it's this Sunday in May. But, and hopefully I won't get too teary-eyed too early, but today is the 20-year anniversary of day one of Adrienne's cancer journey. So it was 20 years ago today when I walked in and found her curled up in that fetal position, where the book starts, and where 6 hours later an ER doctor told us that she had tumors in her liver and lungs. So when I think about 20 years has gone by, it's just kind of stunning for me. But yeah, I've heard many patients actually say to me that they felt like the caregiver had the harder road, because you can only do so much, and yet you just want to fix it. You just want to make it better. You want to make the pain go away. You want to make the nausea go away. You want to fix everything, and you're not able to. And I know for Adrienne, I was in a very healthy state of denial. I just could not allow myself to think about the possibility that she would make it, even though, as you find out when you read the book, there were a lot of things that I intuitively already knew. And I had a lot of premonitions about this. And it was something, though, that I just couldn't let even come to the surface, even for a moment. I couldn't let her see that.
Well, I guess that is what we patients know. Our loved ones are hiding their emotions from us because they don't want to burden us, because they see us already burdened by the physical suffering and other suffering. So, and yet I know to keep those emotions. I'm a clinical psychologist in my day job when I'm not a cancer patient, but to have to keep that emotion to yourself and hide it, to try and keep a poker face all the time around the loved one. The anguish of that, it's almost unimaginable. But especially when you've got when it's a sibling, I can imagine that brings out a whole other level of anguish, because there's the closeness, but in your case also the sort of the maternal need to care for her as her legal guardian.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it was making decisions for based on what your you think the loved one would want, all of these real challenges, even, and even after her death, when you're talking about finding her, her place in the cemetery and looking up and seeing the Hollywood sign there, and the picture you have in the book of the Hollywood sign, for ordinary people like us, we've seen the Hollywood sign on TV 100 times, but that would actually be, iconic in that photo that was very touching. But you're still, even after her death, you're making decisions about would she have liked, what would she
Yeah.
have liked?
I
Yeah.
think, it's interesting. I think as a patient, there's a certain amount of clarity in the situation in that it's live or die. And there are certainly, that aspect of the people around you and you're caring for them, but you're focused on survival. But I
Right.
think the caregivers have such a complex role, and it is so difficult. They are facing enormous emotional hurdles. They're facing informational hurdles. They're facing administrative hurdles, social hurdles. I mean, it just doesn't end. And I think that as a caregiver, it is probably one of the hardest things anybody ever has to do.
Yeah. Robin mentioned earlier that I wrote the book in present tense, and that was a choice. I wanted people to feel like they were right in the trenches with us, so they could feel what I was feeling and what Adrienne was feeling, because of course her point of view is introduced in the book as well. And I had someone say to me one time after reading the book, they said something like, you were her sister, you were her parent, but you were also her nurse, and you were her secretary, and you were her chauffeur, and you were her maid, and you were her cook, and you were this. And until I heard that laundry list of roles that I had, especially during that time, I hadn't even thought about it, because when you're in it, you are so present, and you're just focused sort of 1 hour at a time, one day at a time. You don't really think very much ahead, you're just trying to get through it and get to the next sort of, you know, hurdle, whether it's okay, let's finish this round of chemo. Let's get to that day when her counts are up and she can socialize again, because for Adrienne, it was always, I want to do X, Y, and Z. So when do I get to do these things? How soon can I get out of the hospital? How soon can I go, hang out with my friends again?
Trying to navigate the system is just so difficult. Everything keeps changing. You don't have all the information you need. There was one quote I pulled somewhere about, oh, you wrote, do all nurses try to normalize this environment? Can't you see how upset we are? And yet, this is recreated again and again with everybody that goes through it. How can we change this? How can we set up some landmarks, some points of reference to help people deal with this totally uncontrollable situation a little bit better or a little bit faster, maybe?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question, Pat, right?
Well, I have no answers. It's incredibly difficult.
It is. It is. I feel like the sooner you get help, the better. And one of my struggles during this time, and it was 20 years ago, but is that I couldn't find any support for caregivers. And this is not a what's the word I'm looking for? It's not a spoiler, but there's a moment in the book where I drag Adrienne to this support group for teens with cancer. And I didn't realize until after she had a meltdown that it wasn't about trying to get support for her. It was about trying to get support for me. I was so desperate to meet parents and to find some kind of support. And it wasn't available, even though, we were being seen at one of the top children's hospitals in the country. We were surrounded by NCI centers living in Los Angeles. That part wasn't the issue. I just could not find the support that I personally needed as a caregiver. And that was a real struggle for me. Even after Adrienne died, it was a struggle.
It seems like the whole psychosocial side of the psychosocial oncology side just 20 years ago was just not thought of. I mean, they thought there was I remember a doctor in your case, well, there might be connection between the brain and body, like, duh. you know, but it's sort of like 20 years ago, they didn't consider the emotional, psychological side of cancer at all. No one did, even 10 years ago. when I was diagnosed, or 11 now. It was 11
And I've
years.
been staying away from hospitals in the interim, but I bet it hasn't changed too much. And I think a lot of the change is coming from organizations like yours, Andrea.
Well,
Some
that's,
of the things that you're doing. You want to talk a little bit about both your Blue Fairy and Cancer University?
Sure, absolutely. So Blue Fairy is Blue Fairy, the Adrienne Wilson Liver Cancer Association, and it's named in honor of my sister. And Blue Fairy's mission is to prevent, treat, and cure primary liver cancer, so specifically hepatocellular carcinoma. That's what Adrienne had, through research, education, advocacy. And I started Blue Fairy about a year and a half after Adrienne died. So we've actually been around for 18 years now. And, we have educational programs, we have advocacy programs, we have an annual research award that we give out every year on Adrienne's birthday. So that just happened last month. And now it's becoming a very prestigious, competitive award. And, I'm happy to say that things are improving in the HCC landscape, especially for advanced HCC. But as many drugs that are on the market now that didn't even exist 5 years ago and not even, 10 years ago, they're still all palliative care. I still don't think there's this idea that you can cure advanced liver cancer. You've got to just catch it early, and that's your only hope. That's it. Surgery, liver transplant, that's it. Once it's advanced, we've got these drugs. They can help you live longer. Hopefully you won't have the bad side effects, good luck. But it is getting better and people are living longer. And which drug works for them is kind of just a crapshoot, unfortunately. And then my other organization, which is relatively new, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cancer University, or as we like to call it, Cancer U. And Cancer U is a membership platform for cancer patients and caregivers, all kinds of cancer, to educate, empower, and engage them to become advocates for their cancer care to improve outcomes and reduce cost. And Cancer University really came out of a problem I was seeing in my own advocacy group, in that I know, for example, Blue Fairy has the best educational materials specific to that kind of cancer. We give them away for free. We ship worldwide. People download them and they're written in layman's terms. Like, that was never the issue. The problem was, even after getting those materials, 95% of the time, patients and their caregivers didn't know what to do next. So they were calling me and emailing me and texting me and Facebook messengering me. Oh, and by the way, please do not send your medical records over Facebook, people. Please. That's happened so many times. Don't do it, because now Facebook has access to your medical records. So don't do that. Anyway, and what I was finding, that I've been coaching pro bono for more than a decade now, patients and caregivers, and I was finding that advocacy is not a natural skill most people possess, but you can teach it. So Cancer U really came out of me trying to figure out a way to solve that problem. Like, to how can we scale that? Because me, myself, and I can't do it alone, but also how can we make it so that it's available for everyone? So it's not just this high-end concierge care for the top 1%, because that exists and that's great. And I don't have any problem with that. I know a lot of people who are cancer coaches. Good. I don't have any problem, no judgment. But for me, I want to reach the masses, because if Cancer University had existed when Adrienne was diagnosed, if someone had intervened that first day or even that first week, I would have known that the chemo they recommended or said we had to do was not going to do anything for her, and that her only shot 20 years ago, her only shot was a clinical trial.
Mhm.
I would have done things very differently knowing what I know now.
How do you teach advocacy? That's really interesting.
That's a good question. Well, you start with finding out what the patient and the caregiver knows, right? What do they know? What do they know to be true? And also, especially for the patient, what do they want to know? Because there are some patients, especially older ones, who may not want to know everything about their disease, but their caregiver does. And that's the person who's really on the front lines being the advocate for them. But not necessarily. It just depends. But you kind of want to get that barometer I think there's a term out there called the patient activation measure, or PAM score, or something like that. But I don't think it needs to be that formal. It's just, what do they know right now to be true, and how much do they want to know, and start filling in the gap. And more than anything else, you teach people what questions they need to be asking. Because if you don't know to ask the question, then how it's like you don't know what you don't know. The word palliative care, for example, never once came up with my sister. I never heard those words. I never did. And that's because I didn't know to ask those questions, even though when you read the book, you find out that I did ask a lot of good questions. I did, but I didn't know to ask that question.
What was striking too is that when in your illustration of the conversations with the doctors, you would ask a question to go, oh yeah, well, oh yeah, there's that. Well, okay, we can do that. Like, again, had you not asked the question, they wouldn't have ever gone, the conversation would have never gone there.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing I think that's so interesting
kept
too
on
is
thinking, if this was known, why wasn't this talked about as an option weeks ago or months ago even?
I know.
It's
We had
just
to
like,
we had to see a commercial about Epogen to get her a prescription for Epogen. We had to see a commercial on television,
yeah,
you know.
yeah, and you'd like to think that when clinicians are with you, that they have in fact already thought through the options, but some of them seem to be thinking on their feet, or they only read the report, the scan, 2 minutes before the appointment, and so they're just kind of winging it, and that becomes evident that you had to steer a lot of those doctors into giving you real answers. They had them, but they just weren't sharing them.
I think also it's just unfortunate that the first doctor we had, Dr. No, as we like to call him in the book, was not a good doctor for us. And also he did not know my sister's cancer very well. And what I think he should have done, and I'm sure he's long since retired now because he was in his 50s at the time, he should have from the very beginning, I feel, have said, this is not a pediatric liver cancer, and I don't know this disease. Let's get her pain managed, and let's get her to USC, UCLA, or City of Hope, because they see this cancer every day. They treat this cancer. Let's get her over there, because if he had made that recommendation, I wouldn't have spent 6 weeks fighting with the insurance to get her transferred to UCLA.
That was a whole other eye opener to the book about the insurance challenge, and that you were able to afford care for her, insurance for her, but not for yourself. So
Right.
you were when you were exhausted and sick, and that there was nothing to help you through your medical needs.
Yeah, I had no health insurance, and I only had health insurance for her because there was a loophole in the California law. And I believe in reading. When I get papers, I actually read them, and I read because there's always something, right? There's always the devil in the details. And the only reason I had medical insurance because I had read about a loophole in the California law. And that's why I didn't adopt Adrienne. If I had formally adopted her, she wouldn't have been eligible for insurance. But because I never adopted her and I was her legal guardian, she got 100% coverage from the state of California.
Wow.
It's just a
And
loophole in the law.
her care must have been spectacular, because when you read the giant list of the medications, the giant list of all the procedures that she went through, like 4 or 5 procedures a day sometimes, it must have been, I can't even fathom what the bill would have been had you not had coverage. Or even if you were,
I can't either.
you would be bankrupted for life.
Oh yeah, yeah. And when we occasionally did get a bill, I just resubmitted it. I just refused to pay it. I just didn't.
But that's a navigation skill too. Like,
It is.
know that, right? Or know that.
Yeah.
Know to do what they can do around those third-party payers that make it really, really difficult sometimes.
Yeah. I think a lot of it too is just also helping patients and caregivers navigate that relationship with each other. And I'm thinking of a very particular patient right now. She had 2 different types of liver cancer. Her only caregiver was her adult son, who had just turned 30. And she wasn't given any discharge instructions. And she was seen at a good hospital, but no discharge instructions. And she ended up going to the ER 6 times over a 12-week period, because every time something happened, she and her son panicked. which of course for a cancer patient, the last place you want to be is the hospital. It's the worst possible place.
Especially under COVID times.
Exactly. And you know, she had good insurance, so they covered it. But in addition to that, there came a time where her doctors stopped chemo for a while because she just wasn't eating enough and she wasn't strong enough. And she got very frustrated and angry. And then her son got very frustrated with her because she wouldn't eat. And I ended up on a three-way coaching call with them, talking it through, you know, talking about, okay, well, let's talk about, you know, what upsets your stomach, what you can't eat, and talking with her son and just helping him understand at the end of the day, he could not control her.
Right.
You know, he absolutely couldn't, but also really helping her understand that her doctors weren't out to get her. But, you know, at 100 pounds dripping wet and over 5'6" easily, because I met her in person, you know, she wasn't strong enough to take on more chemo. She had to put on some more weight. In fact, we joked about it because that call was right before Christmas. And I said, you're the only person I know whose New Year's resolution is to gain weight. That's your New Year's resolution. But we actually talked about things that she could digest. And I kept thinking, my gosh, you know, nutrition.
How,
Nutrition is
how is it that you had
essential.
no counseling on that prior to
None.
making
She
this?
had none. No counseling on nutrition. And at that point, she had been, you know, diagnosed at least like 18 months before.
And was in weight loss peril, right? So she was,
Yes.
you know, and it
Yeah.
wasn't like weight is something that's documentable and it would be documented in her charts that she was going lower and
Abs.
lower. One
Yep.
would think that would trigger the physician or referral to a nutritionist right then
Yeah.
and there.
Well, I think nutrition too is one of the few things you can actually have control over. And part of
Exactly.
psychologically, part of this experience or part of surviving this experience is to find things you can control in a totally uncontrollable situation.
I
And
totally
food is
agree.
one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
So eat those leafy greens, you know?
You know, with Adrienne, it was like, what can I get her to eat? You know,
Yeah.
what can I get her
Yeah.
to eat? It was a huge accomplishment when I got her to drink blue Powerade. So,
Yeah. And you know, and reading the story, that really did stand out, the struggle to maintain her weight and how inability to eat because of the incredible nausea was, you know, that she was constantly behind the eight ball because she could not eat enough. And it was, you know, many ways, the strength, the physical strength she had to last as long as she did under the conditions she was living. I mean, it was sounded very, very hard for her to
yeah.
to endure all of the unwellness that she experienced with the various drugs. And it's, you know, and I was struck by the part of the book where you're saying the doctors treat it like some kind of whack-a-mole, like, oh, you've got this here, well, here's a drug for that. Oh, that drug causes that side effect. Oh, well, here's a drug for that. Oh, wait, there's a side effect there. Now we have to do this one. And it was just this medical cascade. And I kept wondering, does she really need to be that medicated? Could it have been, if she'd had someone more focused on nutrition and more holistic things, could they have found a less, you know, invasive or intrusive way of controlling some of the symptoms she had? Now, I don't know, not being a physician, but at the same time, it just I wonder if today, 20 years later, if cancer care would be more humane in saying, yeah, there's no point in giving anybody a drug that leaves them horrendously nauseous. There's the price of it is not worth the pain.
Well, looking back now, I think it's ridiculous that they put her on birth control to try to control her cycle. Because I know that was, again, knowing now, you know, knowing what I know now and looking back, I know that was a big part of her nausea. She'd never been on birth control. And then to put her on the pill twice a day, and it didn't work. Like they were trying to, you know, control her cycle. It's like you can't control Mother Nature. It totally did not work.
Yes.
And of course, when we started getting down to the essentials, when she was taking a turn for the worse, and they were like, okay, what can we truly cut out just so her liver doesn't have to work so hard to process this medication? And one of the first things to go is the birth control. And I was like, God, she didn't need that, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
but that was standard of care for any teenage girl who had cancer. They would immediately put her on the pill to try to control her period.
I
Stupid.
wonder, now do they have a better sense of how menstrual cycles are related to female function? Or
You know,
is
that's
it,
a good,
is that just sort of male misogyny kind of poking in there? Let's control this thing instead of let's just roll with it because she's a woman and she's a human and she's going to have this. So I don't know. I just you can't,
makes you wonder.
people didn't know what they didn't know, including, and doctors didn't know either. But it just seems that in the past 20 years, there's a lot more research on how central the centrality of hormones, especially teenagers, is to their overall well-being, and that if you're going to
Yeah.
screw around with that, you're really going to impact their mind as well as their body
Yeah.
to their detriment.
If you could distill some of this down to maybe about 3 to 5 points for people, what would you tell them to help them through this sort of situation?
Whew, what would I tell patients or caregivers or both?
Well, the caregivers especially.
Um, if your loved one has an advanced cancer of any kind, look at clinical trials first. Get a second opinion. And if your doctor has an issue with you getting a second opinion, then run for the hills. Like if you have a problem getting those reports or anything, like if they fight you any step of the way. If your doctor will not answer your questions directly, and instead they start using euphemisms, like now would be a good time to go to Hawaii, as Dr. No did, get a new doctor. Number 4, you have to stay organized. It is essential. And I still firmly believe, and we actually teach this in Cancer U, that you need a paper copy of everything because most EHRs don't talk to each other and you're going to have to pull it up on your phone and show it. So we really, really believe that it's essential to have a 3-ring binder with all your paperwork divided by tabs. And that way, that binder goes wherever the patient goes. So let's say you can't take your loved one to an appointment, but another family friend is, that binder goes everywhere with the patient. And at all times you have records of everything in one place, you know, whether it's labs or social security or insurance, you know, or my sister's case, you know, we had school stuff in there as well, you know, print out everything and get that giant 3-ring binder and have it on paper. And I guess number 5 is, you know, really, really appreciate the good days and enjoy those good days. And you really have to just relish those good days and have fun. And I'll add number 6 for caregivers. You cannot control the patient. You cannot. You know, my sister did not want to be around other sick teens because it made her feel worse. You know, one of my favorite moments with Adrienne was when we went outside. It was during her 3rd round of chemo, and it was incredibly rough compared to her 2nd. And everything that could go wrong kept going wrong. And we went outside, and I realized she hadn't been outside in more than a week. And she just didn't want to talk. She wanted to be, that's what she said. And it was a really hard time. But I still remember it like it was yesterday because we were just being. And we were just sitting outside in front of Children's Hospital. All this traffic was zipping by, and it was just me and her just sitting there, you know, both kind of lost in our own thoughts. So you cannot control the patient.